Hey everyone, I just wanted to give a quick update on my progress on adding Windows support to Podman Machine. Now in this iteration, the workflow is pretty much the same as it was in the last iteration. However, in that case, we were doing a Podman init install on a system that already had WSL enabled. While this will be the case for many Windows 10 and later systems, it's not always the case. So it depends on the installation options selected, which edition of Windows, which developer toolkits have been installed on the system, and so on. So in my case, what I have here is a install of the consumer edition of Windows 10 Pro, and so it does not have WSL enabled by default. So all I've done is I've set up a Windows terminal instance, installed Windows terminal, so that we have our nice integration with PowerShell with reasonable and nice copy and paste. And then I've also ran the installation process for, so like if you were to go to the Podman website, you would download the Podman Windows installer and then run that, and that would set up a podman.exe in your path so that you can then pull up your terminal environment and run Podman commands. So in this case, as before, I'm going to type Podman, let me just get my cursor in the right place, Podman machine init. And I'm not going to specify, this time I'm not going to specify release version because I've went ahead and I've updated the default. So now the default is 35 instead of 34, although you could still use that image path flag to pick a more recent version of Fedora when it comes out. Now, what's going to happen in this case, since I don't have WSL installed, is Podman is going to detect that WSL is not installed and offer to install it for you. Now, this is a little bit different from the standard because we could just recommend to run the WSL -- install process. But the problem with the WSL -- install process is that it forces you to install a distribution from the store in addition to the Podman installation we already want to do. So it effectively means taking the time to install 2 distributions, and the store installation process takes longer and has a wizard that you have to go through to set up users and stuff like that, which in my case I don't care about because I just want Podman. Let me just zoom in so you can see this window a little bigger. But essentially it just says that administrator privileges are going to be required because it needs to essentially re-exec the Podman command to perform certain administrative actions, including triggering a reboot. And so it warns you, you'll have to wait for a full Windows restart for as part of that installation process. Now you could click cancel and do this at a later time if you want. And if you choose, you could choose to install WSL yourself via some other mechanism. In this case, we would love for Podman to do it for us, so I'm going to go ahead and say OK. And since it did mention administrative privileges are going to be required, we're going to get the user access control, the typical user access control prompt, which says that Podman .exe is requesting the ability to make changes to the system. And I'm going to say, yes, please do so. And I'm just going to go ahead and zoom right back out. And what's happening is Podman is launching a separate window and it's performing the feature installation. So because we're not doing the full WSL -- install, we're doing the customized installation process. It's manually enabling the 2 Windows features that are needed for WSL to run. So that's the virtual machine platform for Windows and the WSL feature. So once those are installed and successful, in this case you can see the output was, we get one more prompt saying, okay, this is the time for a reboot, and also please give a minute or 2 for that terminal process to launch, because the way the restart process works, the desktop gets initialized and it takes a while for the run once installation commands to actually execute. So I'm going to say okay and go ahead and start this. And then, so just so you guys don't have to go through the full reboot process, I'm just going to fast forward real quick. But the process takes, like a minute or 2 to actually get back to the case where the window is running. Okay, great. So I was super patient and I waited for that for those terminals to launch as the instructions told me to. And if you notice, the browser window popped up and went right back to the website. That's because as part of the installation process, I set a flag so that applications that can restore state have the ability to do so. So hopefully the process isn't too invasive for users. So once again, though, because we've done a restart, we need to reestablish administrative privileges. So there's another ask for Podman exe to make changes. Unfortunately, in an ideal world, it would be possible to do the WSL kernel install at the same time as the feature install. However, that's just not possible. The only thing that can happen is you can stage the install of the kernel, but effectively you still have to have a two-phase process. So first phase, install features, reboot. Second phase, install the WSL kernel for distributions to use. Now, if at any point in time an error was to occur, the actual Podman machine init process will just pick up as it did before. And also, I should mention that when the reboot happened, it actually preserves the flags. So if you had specified, say, an image path flag or some other options or settings, those would carry over through the reboot, so you don't have to remember what you typed and type in exactly the same thing and worrying about it matching. Okay, so now that's happened and it's picked up where it left off, and the kernel install was successful, and it is now in the process of actually configuring our distribution, so installing Fedora. Now, one thing that's kind of a little bit new is there is a message here about that this import process can take a while if it's the first time of a WSL install. Essentially, that means if the virtual machine platform feature has been enabled or not enabled in your base install, could mean that there could be an additional 5 minutes that you have to wait, which is unfortunate. Potentially, there could be a second reboot, but I'm not sure that's any better. I mean, you effectively wait about the same amount of time anyway, so I just went with this approach of a prompt, open to suggestions to change that, of course. So you don't have to go through this full installation process, so I'm going to speed this up as well. But essentially that will get us to the exact same thing we had before, where we will have a prompt where it'll tell us that we could run podman machine start to start our podman machine instance. Okay, great. Our install was done. It didn't take very long, just a couple minutes. And now all I could do, now I could just do the exact same commands. Also new in this iteration is I've implemented the full command set. So you can now do, for example, podman machine ls, and it will show you, it'll provide you all the different stats. One thing that's a little different is the stats are based off of what's actually in use as opposed to the allocated size because of the way that WSL works. Memory resources and disk storage are all acquired on demand as needed. They're not hard limits. You can actually set hard limits if you choose, like say you have a container that is performance intensive and you don't want that to interfere with your desktop performance. You can actually configure WSL to limit its resources, in which case when you run this ls command, it would reflect whatever the underlying limitations were, although in many cases they would be lower than what those limits are. The biggest case you would see it is for things like the CPU count. When the instance is not running, it does not report values because it is not actually or not necessarily using any resources. So I'm going to go ahead and type podman machine start, and it starts fairly quickly if the WSL instance is running. It takes a tiny bit longer, like in this case, where it needs to quickly start up the kernel for the first time. And then I can do an ls, and I can see now I've got some values. Currently, there is it's reporting 4 CPUs, which is what I have in my virtualized instance of Windows. And the memory setting is a little bit different. It's conveying the actual amount that the kernel has. So it's really just what gets shared across distribution, so you wouldn't want to add the numbers. The disk size, though, is independent per distribution. So this just is the amount that has been allocated to that install, and as I install and use more, it'll slowly expand. And now that I have my instance running, as before, you can run Podman commands, like you can say Podman run UBI8 micro and date, for example, and that'll return the value as I showed last time. after doing a fetch and pull. The Podman machine instances support multiple installations of Podman, so you can actually have parallel installs for whatever reason. Like say you want to have maybe different workflows or different container workflows, and you want to set each one up differently, you can do so. And those will show up in the ls command. And as I mentioned, they can all be running in parallel, and they each get their own SSH port, so that they get everything works correctly. Now, because again, all distributions on WSL normally share the same kernel anyway, the network interface and all that kind of stuff is all shared between all of them, between all distros, including any others that you may have installed. And then, of course, I can also destroy an instance. So if I do Podman machine stop. Well, actually, before I show you stopping it, let me just quick show you the WSL capabilities. As I mentioned in the last video, I was considering automatic entry into that nested process namespace, which is now the case. So if I was to run, I'm just going to relaunch Windows Terminal, and then as soon as it decides to draw, okay, then from this little drop down, you could pick, for example, Podman machine default, and then it will create a new tab eventually, and then take me right into the instance, and it automatically enters, and it warns you that, because it's entering into a namespace, for you to exit, you have to Control D twice to get out. But then, as before, you can execute Podman commands locally. So I'm just going to exit out of this, and then I can show you that stop process. So Podman machine stop is implemented. So it's no longer responding to SSH, and then I can destroy the instance as well. And it will tell you the files that are about to be destroyed and the unregistration of the instance. And as you can see, there is no longer any distributions that are currently installed. Okay, so that's it. Thank you very much. If you have any further questions, feel free to let me know, send me a note, and I'll probably do another one of these when I have something more interesting to show next. Thank you.